I call the meeting of the December 12th, 2023 Ordinance Committee meeting to order. Ms. Clerk, may I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Here.
Chair Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
Thank you.
Are there any changes to the agenda?
We have no changes to the agenda.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments on matters not on the agenda today?
For those who are listening via Zoom, if you would like to have public comment for items not on the agenda, now's the time to raise your hand. We don't have anybody in person. so
Okay.
No public comment.
All right, thank you. And may we have the reading of the first agenda item, please?
Item number 1, Local Housing Trust Fund. The Ordinance Committee consider an ordinance adopting the City of Santa Barbara Local Housing Trust Fund and forward the ordinance to the City Council for introduction and adoption.
Okay, may we have the staff report, please?
Good morning, Ordinance Committee. Assistant City Attorney John Doim is happy to be here to present the ordinance proposing a local housing trust fund for the City of Santa Barbara. Our request today is for you to consider the proposed ordinance and forward such ordinance for City Council for introduction and adoption. Previously, the idea and concept of a local housing trust fund has been presented to Ordinance Committee. Just as to go over that again, it's local housing trust fund is a matching fund program created by the state legislature, by the housing community development part of the state, to basically support and create affordable housing. It's there to increase the stock of affordable housing units within respective jurisdictions. So this local housing trust fund that we are proposing today would only apply within the city limits of Santa Barbara. They can take many shapes and forms. They can be public, joint public-private, charitable, etc. There are some mandatory requirements for a local housing trust fund. For us and our purposes today, for the city, must be created by ordinance, have the following requirements. Funding requests of a minimum of $500,000 and up to $5 million, and there must be an ongoing revenue source, a dedicated source for that, and the period of time that a housing trust fund must last is for a period of 5 years at a minimum. Some other important considerations in developing a local housing trust fund ordinance, or what to consider for today. Matching funds must be available at the time of the application to receive state funding. So what we're able to do is, if we have a local housing trust fund and we have funds in there, we are able to receive matching funding from the state. And furthermore, you'll have later on today at council the proposed housing element. The city must have in place in order to receive that type of funding and adopt it and compliant to housing element in place. In addition, if the city, if we have an adopted housing element and we also have an adopted local housing trust fund ordinance today, we will be able to apply for grant funding in the spring. In addition, because this is will be a new local housing trust fund, we can also, the state has set aside additional 15% for new housing funds, so local housing trust funds, so we can actually access those additional funds. One important caveat is their matching funds cannot be a funding source already dedicated for housing uses by state or federal law. And before you up there on the slide is an example of eligible matching funds versus ineligible. And you'll see the difference in terms of TOTs, sale tax allocations, in lieu fees, which our ordinance proposes. Those are eligible. Obviously, things dedicated to housing, such as home investment partnership programs, block grants, et cetera, cannot be. Type of projects, right, that can be used for local housing trust funds. It could be transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, for sale home buyers, ADUs, junior ADUs, rental units with a restricted covenant of 55 years, so no rental assistance there. And then let me give the background in terms of how we came to this point. On June 28th, the Ordinance Committee here requested information on the requirements to establish a local housing trust fund. September 9th, staff presented to the Ordinance Committee the concepts and what is required to establish one, and Ordinance Committee forwarded to the Finance Committee to determine the funding sources, as I talked about in the previous slides. Finance Committee met on October 17th and made recommendations of a little bit over 2.8 million that council already allocated on December 6, 2022 to be the starting amount for the matching funds, and then the city's inclusionary fund in lieu fees as an ongoing revenue source. So now I'll bring to you the proposed ordinance. And before I start on this, I also want to raise that our very cherished partners, the Housing Authority, also made some comments and proposed some edits to the ordinance, which I will go over and present up in the slide. We do appreciate those comments, and I also wanted to kind of go over our positions on some of the proposed edits. But first, I'll start off with at least some of the key provisions of the ordinance. So one important thing is we decided to codify the Housing Trust Ordinance in the Muni Code in Chapter 2680. So we're creating a new chapter. And there's an important reason for that. Number one is the distribution of funds being required in our city to be done so by ordinance, but also to have it codified so to show the intention for it to be a permanent fixture, as well as the ability for developers and so on to be able to easily find our local housing trust fund ordinance versus trying to look through resolution, et cetera. Also in there, as you see, we follow the direction given by Finance Committee as the dedicated funding source of the 2.8 million being granted by City Council in December and using in lieu housing fees under the municipal code. We also have, as we heard last time in Ordinance Committee, the desire to allow for partnerships, private contributions, et cetera. So the ordinance creates such a flexibility that we allow for future sources of funding, including from private contributions. The Housing Trust Fund, the monies in there will be administered as normally usually of a lot of our trust accounts by the finance director, and the application process review for projects will be established and reviewed by the community development director. We'll go over the issue in terms of we dedicated why we wanted the forms and the guide. We will follow the guidelines from the HCD in terms of our forms. We left it in terms of the community development director. I know goes up one of the issues to create such forms. We didn't want to codify that in the ordinance because we want to allow flexibility. If there are changes in state law, et cetera, we don't need to come back and amend our ordinance. We will quickly develop such forms and the processes. We don't want to making it painstakingly hard. We want to make it very efficient and easy to do to get the funding out to for affordable housing. But it's not something we want to codify or put in dates in an ordinance. And we do this many times. We do this, for example, on small wireless facilities or our electric bikes. We let the department create the forms. Just the ordinance says the forms will be developed by the responsible department or party. The ordinance also requires a yearly report to City Council, contains information such as the funds collected, the projects, the funds that were committed to those projects, et cetera. And the City Council also has a huge say in this. They will hold public hearings on eligible projects. Another point is in terms of interest, and I have here Keith DiMartini to speak on that too. Typically, we would take all our funds and we pool it all together and get interest on such, and then the allocation of the interest goes back to proportionally to each fund in the city. So that would be the same occurrence here for this fund. And in terms of disbursement, one of the most important things for this is for the projects, we strictly follow the HCD requirements. So up there, at least 5%. And plus 5% of matching funds can be taken off the top for administrative costs of creating this fund and administering it. And then we follow strictly there in terms of at least some of the funds being restricted to extremely low housing. You see 30% of that, no more than 20 for it being moderate income, and the remaining of it being for lower income households. 80% MII and below. And we follow strictly the ACD guidelines on that as well. And so we thought that was important to put in the ordinance. And with that brief presentation, City Attorney Sarah Connect and myself and Keith DiMartini are available for questions, as well as Eli Isaacson.
Thank you so much for that report. I'd like to open it up to my colleagues now if they have any questions. Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dimas, just a couple of questions. The language on review doesn't really specify where stuff gets approved. And my recollection is we had discussion on council approving versus somebody else approving based on immediacy of decisions needed at sometimes when an opportunity comes along. So where does this, in this ordinance language, who and where does this get approved by?
Sure. So I'm putting on the screen, I think it's also helpful because we will kind of go over that, as I mentioned early on, or the Housing Authority's comments, so they have their red lines. So I'll use this as I have the ordinance up there. A lot of the projects will get approved by, in terms of the application process, everything is the community development director, but a lot of it is approved by the city council. And I'm trying to get to that section.
So let me tell you what I think I read. So applications will end up for review and applicability by the community development director, but I don't see anything specifically in there saying an application is approved to go spend money on a particular project by who.
Can you repeat that question? Sorry about that.
So what I see is there's language in there that says the application process ends up with the community development director for receipt, review, applicability to whatever's being asked for, but it doesn't say he approves them, he or she. And then I don't see anything else in there saying any say council or somebody else approves that particular project to go forward. I don't see clear language on that.
I think you raise a good point. I think we can put an additional comment in there. I think we need to add an extra sentence in there about the approval being through the community development director.
Who would that be?
There's two ways to go about it, right? You could do it through the community development director. The pros and cons of having it through the community development director is more efficient, quicker, right, versus going through council. Or the other alternative, the only alternative that would make sense would be the city council on a project.
And then other question is, I think you can answer this now. If not, Keith can come up. When we're talking about inclusionary in lieu fees, are those part of the fee schedule set annually at budget time?
I believe so. Do I need a correction?
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez and Committee Member Jordan. No, that is not included in the budget. The inclusionary fees are separated out just to be, collected whenever a project is deemed eligible, and if they choose to pay those fees. So we just have basically a running balance, but it's not something that we project any kind of revenue in.
So but those fees could be changed at any time by council direction?
Correct. Those were done per a study that was made
Right.
back in 2019. And at any time, like annually, they can be changed. But there was such a conversation about making sure that developments would still move forward with the fees that were being charged. So it's up to council on that, what
Okay.
they would want to
So I
do.
would rephrase that question. At council direction, we could ask somebody to review and bring back additional information on the applicability of the current level of fees and whether they're appropriate, too low, too high, whatever, right?
Correct. And then also by ordinance, it is that we are allowed to look at a CPI number to see if it would be something we could bring to council for the adjustment.
And then remind me, the fees are only applicable to projects of less than 10 units?
4 to 9.
4 to
I'm
9.
sorry, 5 to 9.
And is there something that prohibits us also from giving direction to staff to look into the option of larger projects, including the inclusionary, or paying a fee also, so that you could have an option for whatever those fees are for any size project, or you could put the units in the project? Is that an appropriate?
That is
direction?
true.
Okay.
That also was part of the study
Okay.
in how many units were best for the category of an in lieu fee. And when I said 5 to 9, that's for rental.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty much what I'm focused on. Peg?
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. Councilmember Jordan, if I could just add to Ms. Double's response, that the questions you're asking are the exact questions we anticipate exploring once the housing element is adopted. We have very early on in the implementation of the housing element, we're calling for a study to look at both inclusionary rates, but also our in lieu fee structure, and seeing if there are other ways that we could create a framework that encourages housing development. And we'll also, at a similar time, look at what is an appropriate in lieu fee. That fee has not been updated for several years, and so we would come back with a recommendation of what would be the appropriate amount for in lieu fees in the city.
Okay. Save my comment for later. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Jordan, if I could just interject a little bit too, and I think Director Eli is absolutely correct that if we wanted to, and probably appropriate to do a study on the in lieu fee program and where we stand there, but we would have to do a fee study on that and bring that back to council. And also, I just wanted to point out on your earlier question about who reviews the application, who approves the application, and so forth. The way we structured the ordinance, the applications would, as they are now currently for use of housing funds, the applications would be submitted through the community development, through the housing division, reviewed by the community development director, evaluated through the community development director would approve those projects. But ultimately, the projects would come before city council, would come before finance committee as they do right now. But we do have that the discussion to review the criteria for eligible projects would come before city council. Also, annually, the whole program is going to come before city council.
Right.
So in terms of what the eligibility for projects
So you
would
said
be.
two things there on, ultimately it would come before city council, but you ended up with finance committee. So
Well, yeah,
ultimately
because-
it would come to finance committee for a recommendation and then to council?
We could have them all come for approval to city
Okay,
council,
okay.
sure.
So I
We-
guess
we want the program to be
I'll have a
nimble.
comment on that, but you guys should all think about what that really means down in the weeds, because I think I'll have a comment, but I think it's important to know exactly if council's playing a role before the dollars are
Right,
committed, or if council's not playing a role. And when I read in the ordinance too, really they only report out on statuses annually. So just kind of think about that, then I'll have my comments, and then you can
Okay,
eventually, and then you
sure,
can tell me what you think.
That's fine. I mean, we want flexibility, and we want, council to set the program parameters and eligibility for the use of the funds, and then we want community development to apply the parameters to the program, but we need it to be nimble. HCD will issue NOFAs. We have to be able to respond to those NOFAs within a timeliness criteria. So, we have to have a set of applications sort of in the queue in order to be able to respond.
Yep.
So if we have a time gap, then, we could miss that window. So, we kind of want to be able to be responsive.
Okay, I'll kind of have some response to that.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Ms. Sneddon?
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. I think I just have a couple questions in relation to the red line also, but I just want to make sure, we've heard that adding a NOFA or an RFP, and in the letter from Housing Authority and others who have written in have talked about how that would cut down on the efficiency and the flexibility of the program. And I'm not seeing reference to NOFA or RFP in the ordinance, but that leaves open a lot of latitude for what those requirements might be. And I just want to confirm that we're looking for the maximum flexibility and that we're not recommending that route.
Sure, Chair Gutierrez, Councilmember Sutton, that's exactly what our goal and design, that we are just saying the ordinance will develop a form and process, but we are going to follow the HCD guidelines and make it as efficient and least burdensome as possible, because we don't want to do that or go through any of that process. And so our commitment today is to have at least the process and the forms with our office working with community development to have that done by January. And we will follow a lot of what you see in that red line. We spoke to Mr. Fredericks on that. We agree with a lot of those points. Our only difference is we don't think that should be codified in the ordinance for that flexibility. We put that in our application process. So if we ever need to tweak things or certain things, we don't have to come back here. We just go ahead and just do that on that. But that's our commitment to do so.
So then we could have the application process as recommended by Community Development Director and approved by council.
We could.
Okay, I think that would be, will make me more comfortable to know that, those might change and we would want to have approval over those. And then for the already existing affordable housing guidelines, and Ms. Connect referenced the processes already in place, is this ordinance recommending following those already existing guidelines, or would we be making a new set of guidelines that's referenced? I want somewhere for the ordinance to reference guidelines.
Yes, Chair Gutierrez, Councilmember Senate, it's doing two things, right? And Ms. Connect, feel free to also weigh in on this issue. The ordinance does two things. Once, it does follow the existing guidelines, et cetera, but also if money's left over, anything else, it allows council to also have that flexibility to set additional priorities for this funding as well. So we want to have the best of both worlds when it comes to that.
Okay, thank you on that one. And then I'm just looking through the red line and a few places where I have questions on.
And I have the red line up for you on the
Oh,
screen.
good,
so
thank you. So it's page 5 of the red line, and starting with G and H, just above there. Yeah, thank you. So these references to LAIF rate and the residual receipts loans, are we accepting these? Is your recommendation to accept these, and why or why not, these two changes?
We are, and I'll let Mr. DiMartini, if he wants to come speak on that, and Ms. Connect too, if you want to speak on that as well.
Councilmember Sneddon, as Mr. Doimus indicated earlier, the city pools all of the cash in all of the city funds and invests them in our investment portfolio as described in the city's investment policy statement. And so we are not able to say that a minimum interest earnings will be achieved on any particular fund because we pool all of them, and then all of the interest that is earned is proportionately recorded in every fund that has that cash.
Okay, thank you. And then could you speak to the residual receipts loans?
Councilmember Sneddon, if I could just speak to that. So with regard to H, so the HCD guidelines do not allow loans that exceed simple interest rate of 3%. So any of the loans that we would issue would have a maximum interest rate of 3%. And almost all of our affordable housing loans do provide residual receipt 30-year residual receipts loans with 3% simple interest. But again, we wouldn't want to be bound in the municipal code by these provisions, because that would be our underwriting criteria that we would put into the loan documents. So having this, the HCD guidelines change year to year. So we really don't want to have to go back year to year and change the municipal code to reflect this.
So it could say in accordance with HCD guidelines?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, that'd be fine.
Okay. And then the next question on the administration of funds, and I'm understanding that we want flexibility for the forms or to comply with HCD. These all look like things that I would want to know in an application. If this was worded as applications for funding shall include the following and be compliant with state HCD, would that be acceptable? I mean, I think these are all things we would want to know from any project.
Chair Gutierrez, Councilmember Sutton, I think these are things we would exactly put in our forms and our processes, exactly, and have that that would be the baseline for sure. It's just something we wouldn't want to codify in our ordinance, but we would put that in our application process, absolutely.
And where does the ordinance reference that process?
It just, the ordinance, in terms of administration, in terms of this, it's just saying on a form and process developed by the community development director. So that's the flexibility. It gives authority to the community development director to create such a process and forms, and then without having to come back and codify things, if we need to adapt or make changes, we can continuously do so. But by approving this ordinance, you give the authority to the community development director to do so.
So if this section was included and said, applications for funding shall include the following, you would still have all the flexibility, but we would be sure that we were receiving this information.
We could. There's no doubt about that. You know, our ideas when we talk about with ordinances, though, when we talk about at least forms or applications or processes, and because I said there's many examples in our ordinances, we don't codify the actual form or the descriptions of it. Again, for that, we just give authority of who are able to institute it and all that. One potential, maybe compromise, if it would make council, I think, and we've done that before, is after we develop the ordinance, we come back with council so they can see the application process and forms that are created, and the community can see that, and there can be dedication to that. And that way, everyone knows, without having to codify it and etch it forever in stone, but at least you see it, what it is, and then again, allows for the adaptability. We've done that many times before. So that could be a solution versus codifying it, just come
Okay.
back to council on that.
I like that solution. I like it to be developed by the community development director and then approved by council. And then if there are changes, that also gets council approval, because in that application process, it seems like is setting priorities. And so some reference to that. And then the last question I have is page 6, section C on the red line. And can you just talk to me the difference between responsibility and authority and review versus prescribe? And I had to look up prescribe to kind of see what that would mean in this context. So maybe you can help me with what is meant by prescribe here.
You know, Councilmember, Chair Gutierrez, Councilmember Sutton, this is one change that we had no objection to making. I think it's a fine change. Our initial thing is obviously again, giving the community development director the authority over in terms of the process, but the initial approval, as Ms. Connect talked about, this is where it's contained, on the application process. And then in terms of prescribing regulations is developing those standards and regulations. Mind you, though, that a lot of these regulations, there isn't much leeway. A lot of it is already kind of put in place by the HCD as well. And I don't know if Ms. Connect wanted to add anything else to that, but that's kind of but we have no problems with the recommended change here on this at all.
Thank you so much. I do want to just take the chance to comment that because so much work has been done to put this in line with HCD and so that we are eligible, I have full confidence that we want everything to be in line, and thank you for that. So this might, just in that one, I also like this change on that same line, and it includes the application, record keeping and reporting to HCD and the City Council, but maybe we could add the word regulation for the administration of use of funds as approved by the City Council, and then including on, and go from there. I would maybe add that too. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sneddon. I'd like to now open it up to public comment. Ms. Cook, do we have any public comment for this item?
We do. So our first speaker will be Rob Fredericks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Gutierrez and committee members. It is afternoon now. So, first of all, I want to thank staff and City Attorney's Office for their hard work on all of this. It's probably beyond my skill set of what I could do and come up with. So I'm appreciative of it. The reason we put in, into my letter of what we wanted to see is because it's not specified in the ordinance. And being put through what we've been put through over the last year of the cycle of, well, it doesn't contain this, it needs this, or there's disagreements, we wanted to be sure that our position was clear. And I appreciate Mr. Doimus's explanations today. They're very helpful. So, the main reason was that, for our letter is because on our read, there were issues with transparency, specificity, clarity, and just ambiguity in the application process. And when it said that, well, we'll come up with that application process, I don't want to wait another year, have us lose out on the matching funds from the state to come up with a process that's then approved by city council. So that's why we got down into the weeds with a little bit of specificity, even though I'm not an attorney, and so there's probably language in there that could be wordsmithed better that I put in. So a couple of main points that we want that's fine, but I want to make sure. There has been talk of at past meetings, well, maybe they should be NOFAs or RFPs for access to these funds. That takes way too long. We have to take advantage of opportunities that come our way and other housing providers to get these funds in place for acquisition, development. That will take way too long. So that was one. We like the current process that's been used for decades and has worked. That we have an opportunity, we submit a request letter to the Community Development Department, they review it, they send it on to Finance Committee. That's what we would like to see continue. Also, on the review and approval, I know there's some nimbleness to just having the approval at the community director's level, but we are strongly supportive of it being reviewed, the application, within 15 business days, and then forwarded on to the Finance Committee to be put on the next available Finance Committee meeting agenda so that the process can continue to occur quickly. Something else, residual receipts loans. We feel strongly that every new multifamily development should be under residual receipts loans with up to 3% interest and should be a minimum of 30-year term. And that has worked well for us. Since 2002, we've been given residual receipts loans from the city on various projects of up to $10 million total. And in the last 10 years, we've paid back $5 million in principal and interest. The program works, and we need that flexibility to ensure the stability of these developments in the early stages. So we're not trying to do anything other than that. So those are my main points. And as I close out, I just want to say that this past year and a half or so of pushing for these needed funding sources for housing has been difficult for me and my team. It feels like we've been at odds with the city. I've said that before. I don't like being at odds with the city. We are a team. We like to be together. But, last night I was thinking through this, and I truly feel like it's a wonderful life where us housing providers are the Bailey Brothers Building and Loan, and the city is the big bank owned by Henry Potter. And we don't want Santa Barbara to be, we want Santa Barbara to be more like Bedford Falls and not Pottersville, okay? We want everybody to be part of the Bailey Brothers Building and Loan, doing good for the community. That's our concern. That's where we're coming from. Thank you for the extra time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Gabe Escobedo. Gabe?
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez and council members. I don't have a movie reference, I apologize. But I wanted to thank you for your leadership on this. I wanted to thank staff, thank the city attorney's office for taking this so seriously. I'm pretty proud today to have the 2 items on the ordinance committee agenda today, these 2 items. Really important to me, and the fact that you've taken them so seriously, invested so much time, means a lot. So I just want to say I support the changes proposed by the Housing Authority, but I wanted to highlight a few. The first is the need for flexibility. So in the last 6 months or so, I've gotten some insight into the funding mechanisms, the low-income housing tax credits through my other role in the community, and the need for flexibility is there. A lot of these funding sources have really strict rules. They can be slow processes. The need for us to provide as much flexibility is needed. And with that flexibility is the need for transparency, right? So we can't just be so fast and loose that we don't have the transparent part. And I think that transparency comes through an open public meeting with city council approval. Without a doubt, the finance director and the community development director should have a role in distributing funds and reviewing applications. But when it comes to approval of these projects, to your point, Councilmember Sneddon, we want to see that information. We want to make sure that these are projects that are in the best benefit for the community. And so I wonder if, while not enumerating all of the requirements of the application, what if we can say applications will include items such as, but not limited to, and so that we can enumerate some of the things that we're looking for in the application. I have some concerns and I worry about overburdening this fund. This fund should be used to create housing, to build housing. And I worry that if we put too many priorities on this particular fund, that we stray away from that purpose that was initially intended with this local housing trust fund and start adding programmatic expenses. I really, truly believe that when we lost RDA, we lost the foundation of affordable housing in our community. And this is the opportunity to build the foundation for getting that back in our community. We're not going to overburden City Council and Finance Committee, at least in the near term, because there's just not enough funding. I hope that we have that problem at some point in the future, but I encourage you to heed the words of the Housing Authority. And in closing, with just a few seconds, thank you again for taking this so seriously, putting in so much work, and thank you for your leadership.
Next speaker is Leslie Wiscombe.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Ordinance Committee. I just have a couple brief comments. On page 3, first of all, I'd like to thank staff and the City Attorney's Office also. I think this has been a process that's really worked well, and we've made significant progress from where we started. And I appreciate that this is getting codified. I think that's very important. Just a couple of things. I do support the Housing Authority's comments and changes. On page 3, I just wanted to bring up at the top, it talks about a dedicated and continuous source to pay for the operating costs of the fund. And it's really not the operating cost of the fund that implies administrative fees. I think, at least in my mind, I would just like that to simply say for the operation of the fund. And then we've been working for years in this city to streamline permits and approvals and application processes that have become significantly cumbersome. So I think any specific things that we can do to make this process, if you're an applicant, easier is what we need to do. And that would be defining the items that need to be submitted, and then maybe giving the community development director the authority, if additional information is required, to produce that. These organizations that will use this fund are accustomed to building affordable housing, and they're accustomed to what they need to do to apply to do that. And then we've had a lot of talk about this in section 26.80050C, which I believe Councilmember Jordan brought up first, and then Councilmember Sneddon brought up. The responsibilities really aren't clear, and they really do need to be clear. The financial administration of the fund belongs to the finance director, and I think that as well as the annual report, and the community development director is responsible for the applications. And I really appreciated Councilmember Sneddon's, her changing it to say that the applications for projects are recommended by the community development director and approved by council. And then the funds come out of the finance department for that. And that's really all I have. And oh my gosh, I had 1 second left. Thank you all very much.
Next speaker is Stanley Zankoff.
Hello. I know we have a really busy meeting, and just wanted to very briefly say, just wanted to echo the remarks from Rob Fredericks and his really thorough recommendations that we use existing sort of processes to kind of streamline the Hope Fund applications. And I also, I'm looking forward to also the city meaningfully exploring the tenant right to counsel pilot program. I know there's been 1,000 moving pieces in housing work in general, and I know that there's really good resources out there, including an association that looks at best practices around right to counsel that I'd be happy to connect you all with. So again, thank you for all your time and diligence on this.
Frank Rodriguez.
Chair Gutierrez and Ordinance Committee. Like Stanley, really wanted to thank y'all for all the work, the city staff, and especially y'all as council, and asking so many diligent and necessary questions to make sense of this. Especially like Gabe Escobedo said, super excited that we're talking about how production is going to happen, and we're talking about protections. And this Ordinance Committee has been doing so much to really dive deep into it, really be comprehensive with it. That is super appreciated. And I'd love to end the year having these conversations. So thank y'all for all the work. Definitely echoing and uplifting Rob Frederick and the Housing Authority's recommendations, and streamlining and making sure we use the practices that have worked. And excited to see where this program goes in the future. Thanks, y'all.
Rob Pearson.
Good afternoon, Chair Gutierrez and members of the committee. As you heard, my name is Rob Pearson. I had some 40 years of working in the housing field. I started with the city of Santa Barbara, had 5 years leaving here as the housing redevelopment manager in 1981, and then ran the Housing Authority for 35 years. I take great pleasure in knowing I left behind Skip Szymanski and Rob Fredericks. When I left the city, the Housing and Redevelopment Manager recommendation was a woman who was my assistant who wrote our first housing element. Just a little bit of background, and I won't do too much history. But Carol Galante went on to be the FHA commissioner for the United States when Obama was president. So we have good talent in this community. We just got to identify them and keep working with them. I couldn't be more supportive of the Housing Authority's letter to you. My rallying call with the staff when I was working, and that was, I stood at this podium 7 years ago and accepted my thanks for my service. Can't believe it's been 7 years, but it's keep it simple. real estate development is one of opportunity. I don't care whether you're an affordable housing provider or a for-profit housing provider. When a deal hits your desk, you don't have time to tell the owner, well, I got to apply for this, I got to apply for that. They need to know that you will perform. And I think that's what the version on the housing authorities suggested change is really what's important. I also want to hope that this council sends a message to the staff, both city staff and housing authority staff, that it is crucial that they work together on these things. The differences have not set well with me. I've stayed home. I haven't commented. I think Kristen has gotten a couple emails from me. But I recall the days when I would burn the midnight oil with Sarah Connect, and we would be getting that last document finished so we could get it in on time. Dave Davis, Dave Gustafson, Don Olson, David Rowell. You've seen fit to put David Rowell and Stephen Falstich and at one time Dave Gustafson on the Housing Authority Commission. To me, they are some of the most brilliant minds in this community when it comes to housing. So I sure wish you'd look to the Housing Authority Commission, your appointees, for this kind of advice, because setting policy and designing programs and actually building it are two different things. If you don't have the people that know how to build it at the table, it simply won't work. And I just want to see that cooperation return. And I don't know why it kind of got off kilter. I know there's been changes at city staff, but the idea of working together is so important, because ultimately, all the product that the Housing Authority owns belongs to this community. The Housing Authority Commission reports to your council. If you wanted to change all of that, you have the authority to do that on any Tuesday. So recognize that when they are proposing a project, it's really part of your inventory. If the Housing Authority goes out of business, all that real estate goes to the city under law. So I just hope we can get back to that and that you support these proposed changes. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Jessica Wishan.
Good morning. My name is Jessica DeLarbera-Wishan, and I represent as CEO Habitat for Humanity of Southern Santa Barbara County. Thank you for your investment in this process, the journey, and really the investment in a new or different source of funds for the development of affordable housing. As you know, at Habitat, we build new homes, we repair homes, and we protect them through advocacy. And I wanted to comment on 2 points that have a common theme, which is creating options to fund organizations that have different types of unique funding models and making sure that we can accommodate those. The first is it's extremely important to Habitat in particular to have the option of a 0% forgivable loan. Right now, the language says 3%, so up to 3% could accommodate the 0% option. That loan would convert to a grant after a certain agreed-upon time frame has passed. And we successfully did this in partnership with the City of Santa Barbara using RDA funds in Canon Perdido's affordable homes of 12 units in 2012. So that is a really important request, and thank you for your consideration. The second is I did some reflection because I realized in a public comment letter that I submitted on behalf of Habitat, I asked for a NOFA, and I reached an aha moment in even this most recent NOFA about the administrative time required in applying for a NOFA, and in particular, the singular point of time where you apply. And as affordable housing developers, we have to be nimble and flexible. And it was reviewing the Housing Authority's comments around process that I realized that that option is better. But the essence of the NOFA was the publicly understood process, the understanding of how much funding is available when and what to do to apply. So thank you for your past support of Habitat, of your investment in this process, and for your consideration of my remarks.
Chair Gutierrez, no further speakers.
Okay, if there are no further speakers, not online either? Okay, I'd like to open the floor to my colleagues for their comments and potential motions. Councilmember Jordan?
You're just watching my minutes, aren't you? So, first, I want to say I don't think personally, that I think anything with the tension back and forth is not everybody involved trying to do the best thing. There's different perspectives and reasoning and realities and that people have to deal with. But I think everybody's on board with getting someplace that benefits the community. And there's little that I've heard here today or read that convinces me otherwise, or thinks we're not on a track, whether or not I like the track or anybody else out there likes the track. But the track is going in the right direction. I generally like the staff version. I'm swayed more by being as flexible and nimble and non-specific as possible. In fact, I read some of the comments asking for flexibility with the answer to flexibility being something very specific. So I find that contradictory. But I like our draft language. I like Councilmember Sneddon's couple comments on that. And so I'll just launch into mine. I have two real concerns on big picture, and that would be the role of council in the approval. But I'm also uncomfortable with what that does to timeline for opportunities. So, and I don't know how to resolve that, frankly, so I'm not going to. I'm going to let that become a conversation with 7 people. But I think I'm going to ask that same question when it comes to council, and I'd like some more help from both sides of the aisle on that. It's clear to me that the expectation for transparency and accountability lies with council. Doesn't lie behind the curtain at Oz in some department somewhere else. It has to be here. So some method has to be in place that meets the timeline of requests and available projects and the role of council in being the approval for those things. And then the other major point I have of all this that wouldn't be part of the ordinance, but it's actually when it would come to council, I would certainly participate in direction to staff to review and bring back choices on in lieu fees. I think in lieu fees clearly to me represent nothing close to a unit being built now or in the future. They're just a dollar amount that was made up at some time. And if you're not building a unit and you're paying a fee, that fee should be the cost of building the unit. And frequently that cost of building that unit isn't today's cost. It would be accumulating project size fee accumulation to build unit or units. And so somebody would have to do the math to figure out what that looks like in 5 years or 10 years. And so if a unit's costing $500,000 today, you might actually be collecting $600,000 today for a unit that you're going to build in 5 years. And those should be in tandem with each other. We should not be letting people pay in lieu fees that don't actually represent the cost of not building that unit for the community. And I think also part of that I mentioned already too, is what I hear from developers now who are putting in inclusionary units is they would rather pay up front for the projected future cost of that unit even now, because that's a certainty cost that they can build into their project, rather than build the inclusionary units. And so literally they would take any number you throw at them, and that would at least represent certainty in their project and how they're financing it out. And so I think I'm hoping for further discussion when this gets to council on those would be tandem routes on implementing whatever this ordinance is going to look like, but also a review of the in lieu process. And I kind of scoff a little bit about going out and doing a study and looking at the nexus to what because it really doesn't matter. It's really what is the cost of building a unit, not the cost of what the project will bear. You're replacing a unit by not building it. And so that's what I think. That's really, I think, my only two material points. Just a couple editorial points. I don't think anything in the ordinance as we've written it, or the red lines, does not support current or future partners. I think that seems to be part of the underlying tension, is that we're moving in a direction that doesn't support current partners. I don't think that's true. I think much of the red line information is already baked in by structure of legislation or applicability to HCD stuff. I agree with also including a discussion somewhere in the adoption of this of streamlining or recognizing they move to the front of the line, they get automatically, they automatically get assigned a planner, whatever that looks like, that they should do that. Oh, and, I think it's kind of a late hit, but, that's what public comment is for, to make you think about it. I could almost just make a case to talk about reducing the scope of project applicability to just rental units, whatever they are, just rental units. And so it could be rental units, ADUs, or junior ADUs. And I think Gabe talked a little bit about that, but when you do look at those bullet points of everything else, transitional housing, shelter housing, there's some bleed there into existing programs that one could worry about whether the new money is going to end up in existing programs because of that. And so I think that's a concern. And if one way to solve that is to actually just cut down on those bullet points to 1 or 2 rather than the 6, I kind of look at it like a Measure C lesson, where you talk to some people on the second floor, they say Measure C is repairing streets. But you go look at the bullets on Measure C, and it has about 7 different things in it that have nothing to do with repairing streets. And so I think there could be a reasonable perspective here that the money could be accumulated and used in something that's not directly what we really want it to do, and that's create additional living units. Then we could argue about whether they're rental, whether they're home for sale, whether they're ADUs or junior ADUs. But to me, personally, I could live with this effort being made simply for rental housing, whether that's multifamily rental housing or ADUs or junior ADUs. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Councilmember Sneddon?
Thank you. I'm still adding notes of things to say as some things queued there. So just first off, so excited to be here today and where we are with this, and thank you. This has come a long way, and that we're really in the final steps of landmark progress towards affordable housing, and we've had that funding there, and now we're, when we get this in place, we'll be able to launch into getting matching funds and really start to make a difference. So just overarching those, very, very appreciative that this is the direction this whole ordinance has come, and that it's truly local housing, affordable housing trust fund, which is very exciting. So just to kind of wrap up some of the comments we've heard and maybe recommendations, I think before I go into the details of them, I think it would be great if colleagues agree to see this first thing in January with the changes and then also with the proposed process. I think that is what is causing issue. And just to Councilmember Jordan saying hard to see how specificity creates streamlining, the example that popped to mind for me is I'm a teacher. I give very open-ended assignments, and I've learned over the years that it causes tremendous anxiety for students who, and the product that you get in what you can consider an application, an assignment, is wildly varying without some guideposts of this is what we need. And in terms of streamlining, if you know, if it's enumerated what the expectations are, what needs to be included, then it does speed up the process. And with our partners like the Housing Authority or Habitat or Transition House, anybody who is doing multiple applications like this, then those expectations are clear, transparent, and I think does actually streamline the process. So I think that's where specificity can actually make things move more quickly. So I think in the interest of, we've heard multiple times, the opportunities go away if we move too slowly. We certainly don't want to do that. So I think it needs to be really clear that we're not going to use a NOFA RFP process. That seems to be, again, in the open-ended language, which seem to, want to promote flexibility, creates anxiety of like, well, is that going to come later, or what do you want, or what are you looking for? So I think we do need to be very clear on the process. So for recommendations, how would it be, and I'd like to recommend this, but also with input, if we use the already existing affordable housing guidelines, just cut and paste those processes or refer to them, or use our already existing successor fund application process. If we refer to those in the ordinance, then those have flexibility to change over time, and they might not change for a long time. That's what our partners are already used to using, comfortable with, and I think that would go a long way to streamlining. And then we wouldn't need to enumerate that process within the ordinance. Would that be something that?
Yes, Chair Gutierrez, Councilmember Sutton, I spoke with Mr. Isaacson and we agree with that, and it sounds like Housing Authority and other community partners agree with that too, and we can just refer to that. It's already existing. It's people have no objection to that. They know what it is, and it's quick and form, so why reinvent the wheel? And we can just refer to that in the ordinance and be done with it, and it simplifies it.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay. So then that would then be the ideal process. Then it would still be the same. It would go to community development for recommendation, then go to finance for approval, and council approval, which also has the benefit of highlighting to the community where these funds are going, and we're so proud of these projects. So it's great when it comes to council, and we can publicly approve these also. So I think that takes care of one of the big recommendations from the Housing Authority letter, which had so much support, which was really transparency, consistency in the process, which I think is really important. You've already agreed to the change in the language to striking the community development director who shall have the authority to prescribe regulations, and changing that instead to the recommendations that can then be approved by council. I completely agree with Councilmember Jordan. We have to drastically increase those in lieu fees. I realize that's not part of this ordinance, but it's too easy to buy your way out of actually producing the housing that we need. I'm satisfied with the answers from City Attorney Sarah Connect about residual receipts being the majority, and I think by leaving that language a little bit flexible, it also allows then for 0% or different types of opportunities that come up. So I don't want to limit with that either. I would say if we can come back in January, I think just for one final pass, just to say yes, and with that recommendation to work with the Housing Authority to just, so that we're not in the position here of seeing a red line and a not red line and trying to, on the dais, sort that out. It would be so great if in January this could come back with the stamp of approval from all of our partners. And in detail reading of the housing element, which we did for later item today, it says right in there that the Housing Authority of the City of Santa Barbara is our own arm. And it's, quote, "It is an operating arm of the city." So let's not cut off our arms, spite our face, or whatever the saying is. Let's use them. They have their workhorses, and they have so much history and knowledge, as do you, and the combination together is just win-win all the way around. So I would recommend, if it comes back in January, with the stamp of approval all the way around, with those processes referenced to, and so that we can I think that would be really great to just have the process not within the ordinance, but referred to by the ordinance. And then I think we're there at that point.
Councilmember, Chair Gutierrez, Councilmember Sutton, I think your suggestions are excellent, and certainly we're going to follow them. I think the biggest issue you solved in terms of recommending the conflict of putting the process and just following our procedure so we know exactly currently what we have. It's transparent, it's known in terms of that. So following that and making these changes, I think with those changes, it's something we can make successfully in January. My only suggestion, and just a suggestion obviously, is considering we want to have this ready and considering even the housing element being up for today and us looking forward to making applications to the HCD and getting grant funding, is it possible with these changes that we make that we're promising today to actually bring it forward to council just because of the timeliness of wanting to be ready for the state grants come springtime?
Okay, thank you. Then with those changes.
With those changes.
And I think also,
absolutely.
and actually just to be really clear, just to quickly go through the red line, accepting most of these changes. I do think the one about the reference to the LAIF rate and the residual receipts, I think we don't need those in there, given the answers provided there too. So then I'm comfortable with that, if you want to make the changes, and then we want to see it as soon as we can in the new year so we can get that money. Do you need a motion to that effect?
Yes.
Oh.
Thank you, Councilmember Sneddon and Councilmember Jordan.
So could somebody on staff specifically speak to the, it's not really in the ordinance, but it's on the types of projects that may be funded, staff report page. And so, there's just maybe all kinds of mischief on the slide deck that's less mischief in the ordinance, and is the slide deck just a result of what could possibly be possible based on the ordinance, and that would just be resolved sitting up here project by project if there was some dissatisfaction with creep into other existing areas that aren't specifically a priority for rental housing, for affordable rental housing?
Councilmember Jordan.
Councilmember Jordan, before Mr. Isaacson jumps in, and I'll let him jump in, but these are just a list of projects that HCD will consider as part of your
Okay.
application. These do not reflect what this city would be required to approve. So it would be completely within the jurisdiction of the city council
Okay.
to approve the projects
All right.
it wants
That
to
makes me feel
fund.
better. Right. Okay, I'll leave that concern aside. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. So is there a motion? Was there a motion made?
Are you ready for a motion?
I am ready.
Okay, I will make a motion with the described changes that the ordinance move forward and come to City Council.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, motion made by Councilmember Sneddon, seconded by Councilmember Jordan.
Okay. Moved by Councilmember Sutton, seconded by Councilmember Jordan to move forward the recommendations to council with the described changes.
May we have a vote, please?
Don't vote yet, please. Go ahead and vote.
Okay, that passes unanimously.
Correct.
Thank you, everybody. We'll now move to the next item. I just want to note that we have a hard stop at 1:45, so we're going to try to get through this as quick as possible. Madam Clerk, may you read the next item, please?
I'm going to call it, and then I'm going to set up your display. Are you doing the presentation? Okay. Item number 2, continued committee deliberations of tenant protection ordinance. I tried. We're trying. Yeah, it's all wacky. We're trying to- yeah. Lower. And then it'll get really close.
Take one and pass it. I'm doing it. Take one.
Sorry about the heat. We're trying. Yeah, something's going on with our. Okay, so over here. Okay.
Would you like me to start?
Yes, so let me just clarify that we have a hard stop at 1:45, so we have about an hour. This is the continuation of last week's item on the rent eviction proposals. And yes, so,
And public comments closed.
yeah, we had public comment already last week, so we were just going to have an update and then come back to the council for deliberation. Thank you. So yeah, may we have the staff report, please?
Thank you, Honorable Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for turning up the heat for me. It feels nice and warm in here. I wish I would have worn my flip-flops, but I didn't. I wore my shoes. What I would like to do is, after the public testimony at last meeting and based upon some of the comments made by the committee, I've prepared an update to the proposed ordinance that addresses the issues that were made and also incorporates the specific requested changes that were suggested by legal aid. Copies of the proposed red line have been placed at the back, and they're available for the public for review. With the chair's permission, I'd just like to go through those very briefly before you begin your deliberations. The first change is on page 3 of the ordinance, and this is simply a request in subdivision A to clarify that in a proceeding where just cause is at issue, that the owner has to prove the just cause, that it's the owner's burden of proof for just cause, and that the just cause must be stated in full in the notice of termination. So what the reasons are given to the tenants are the reasons that are also given to the court, and the owner's required to prove those. And again, these are all legal aid requests unless otherwise indicated. They also requested a minor change to our definition in subdivision E, on that same page. What we were trying to do was make sure that the ordinance covered all types of recoveries of possession and terminations of tenancy. And so we added additional language to include recovery through court proceedings as part of that. The next change is the one that is on page 4. This was the request that was made and the very long red line that was included in the handout of the last meeting. We've simplified it, boiled it down, and it simply means that the exception does not apply to tenancies assisted by Section 8 if the housing is not otherwise restricted. And so this was a request by legal aid. We've incorporated it, and it's good. The next change is in Section 4 of the ordinance. It's just a clarification that the amount of the tenant relocation assistance indicated in the notice must be in a dollar amount. They have to tell you how much it is. Not sure why we needed to have that clarification, but apparently some notices are given that aren't as clear as they should be. The next clarification is in Section 5 of the ordinance on page 5 of the document handout, just clarifying that if you don't give the required notice, the notice is void. It has no effect. We don't have to argue about that. And then there was a request to add a requirement that the consistent with the owner's obligation to prove up just cause, that the failure of the owner to plead and prove compliance with the chapter would be a defense in an unlawful detainer action. That's just clarifying language that again, legal aid had requested. Other red lines are simply because we either change the numbering or the lettering. The next substantive change is on page 9, and it has to do with when an owner seeks to, in good faith, recover possession to permanently withdraw a rental unit from the market. We added a requirement that the notice of termination needs to be filed with the community development director, and that it must state the intended use of the unit and the lot, and of the lot on which the rental unit is located. That gives clarity to the good faith effort to actually remove it, the unit from the rental market. It'll be used for some other purpose. On page 11 is the next item of amendment, and we just wanted to clarify that a qualified tenant is one who has continuously and lawfully occupied or had the legal right to occupy a rental unit for 12 months. We didn't want, for example, somebody who was a tenant for 12 months, but in a hospital on an extended duration. They still have the right to occupy the unit, but they didn't actually occupy because they were in the hospital. We wanted to close any argument about that not being a qualified tenant. The last, the next substantive change is starts at the bottom of page 13 and goes on to page 14. And this responds to a comment that was made by the Renters Association, the Realtors Association, that they thought that the rent restriction was a violation of Costa-Hawkins. We looked at this, essentially really the right of refusal is really a continuation of the pre-existing tenancy, not a termination of a tenancy and the start of a new tenancy. And so we just made a clarification to add a sentence that says that's exactly what's happening. It's deemed for all purposes to be a temporary interruption of the tenant's right to the unit, and that the exercise of the first refusal is a continuation of the pre-existing lease for all purposes. And so we just added that clarification. The next clarification did not come, is on page 14, the addition of section 9. This it did not come from legal aid. It instead was a request by committee member Jordan. And this adds, he asked us to think about and consider whether there could be what he called a cooling off period. And so of 1 year. So we did add a provision that said an owner who acquires 5 or more rental units shall not commence a no-fault just cause eviction of any qualified tenant or demolish or substantially remodel a unit for a period of 1 year following the owner's acquisition of the property. We've discussed this internally within the office, and I've discussed with others. I think that there's no constitutional or statutory reason why we would be precluded from imposing that. It's an economic restriction, much like any other restriction on the relationship between landlords and tenants and the use of property, very similar to just cause in the first place, and zoning regulations. And so we think it's legitimate, and we added it in. The next was a request by legal aid that persons who not only willfully actually engage themselves in any of the course of conduct that would be listed as tenant harassment, but aid or incite a course of action would be included in the prohibited activities, and so we added that in. The next change is on on page 18, and this goes to the civil enforcement relating to the harassment provisions. I want to clarify, there's 2 separate enforcement provisions in here. One is the civil enforcement that we added related to just cause eviction. The other is the civil enforcement related to tenant harassment. They're a little bit different because they go to different conduct, if you will. Just cause has to do with interruption of the tenant relationship. The harassment provisions have to do with people who willfully engage in behavior or conduct that is harmful to individuals. And so one of the requests was that in some instances, actual damage when you've been harassed can be difficult to prove in some instances. And so there was a request for a minimum civil damage amount, and we added that in at a minimum amount of $1,000 per violation or actual damages, whichever is greater. And again, I want to make very, very clear, only courts can award these penalties. So we'd have to bring a civil action, and then the court would award a penalty from this menu of opportunities. There was, for example, request for counsel. This does have a provision that a person who was harassed, who brings an action and is successful, may recover their attorney's fees as part of the award. So that's in here. That's already in there. It was in the pre-existing. And then finally, we added Section 11. Section 11 is a limited, if you will, retroactivity provision. And the intent of this provision is to make it clear that this ordinance, when it's adopted by council, we're hoping it is adopted by council, if it's adopted by council, will apply to any just cause eviction that has not been completed, actually completed, prior to the effective date of the ordinance. And if it's not, then they have to start the process over again. And the purpose of that is to avoid the situation where we've had discussions about new regulations going into effect, and then people engaging in activities in an attempt to skirt or avoid the application of the new regulations. And these kinds of provisions are not uncommon in other kinds of ordinances, and so we included it here. That includes the changes we made. I want to point out that there was one change that was requested by legal aid that related to a different ordinance, a different chapter of the municipal code, which is the requirement to offer a one-year lease. We did not include that in these revisions because it addresses a different topic than the original ordinance. I do think it's a good idea, and I would request that ordinance committee, in your motion, in addition to forwarding on to city council this ordinance with the recommended changes, direct the city attorney's office to prepare and bring back to the ordinance committee, or take directly to council, a ordinance amending chapter 26.40 to close the loopholes that were also included in the legal aid request that was presented at the last meeting. So staff recommendation is to approve the ordinance as amended, forward it on to city council so that we can take action on this in January as soon as possible, and to give the city attorney's office direction to create a separate ordinance to amend chapter 26.40. With that, I'd be happy to answer any further questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My colleagues have any questions? Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Should just take my earnings and run, right? Yeah. I had a couple other questions, though. Just I want to hear what you think. And thank you for the work you did. Increasing the term of tenancy notices. So I made the opinion that with the requirements that we have of going and getting, doing the scope of a project, doing whatever you got to do to get your permits, that would it be possible then to say reasonably that we should increase our noticing time to tenants?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, we left the noticing alone because in order to give the notice, you're talking specifically about either a demolition or substantial remodel. In order to give that notice, you have to get, have all of your permits and everything already lined up, and trying to coordinate that, it could make it an extremely long period of time in advance, and so we left it at the notice period now, which is, I believe it's 60 days in some instances, maybe 120 in others.
So it's always at least 60?
Yeah, always at least 60.
Okay, so I thought we had a 30. And then I've gotten a lot of feedback this week on a lot of things, but one of them that stuck with me at least was the, and I know I made a comment on this at the hearing before, was the separation of a contractor who's going to do the work, or potentially, no, who's going to do the work, and the requirement to go out and find a second contractor to not perjure himself and agree that it is a substantial remodel that requires vacancy for 30 days or more. And I guess I'd just like to visit that again and say, and get your reaction, is that, it's difficult to find a contractor, period, one. And then is there any concern at all, do you think you have any concern over the market availability of another contractor who's actually not embedded in the project, coming along and at their risk only with their licensing and bonding and perjury charge, just offering up a statement that it is certainly a substantial renovation that requires that somebody leave the building for 30 days. And is the fear of the bias by the first party who's doing the project agreeing that it serves their purpose to get them out because it's their project, is the bias that credible of a concern?
Honorable Chair, members of the committee, I believe it is, and that's why we included included it originally. There's the potential for a conflict of interest, obviously. You're basically knowing that you're going to get the work if you recommend that the work be needed to be done. And so it seems that in those kinds of situations with something as important as this, being able to get a second opinion on whether or not is in fact necessary is a good idea, and having that person be different and independent, where they're only they're getting paid for their opinion. Yes, they're getting paid for their opinion, but their opinion is not going to result in extra work for them, at least on that job.
Okay.
And so, yes, I think it's important.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Councilmember Sneddon?
Thank you. This is comment time? Is this?
Yeah, I was just notified that since there was changes to this, I will be opening up the public comment period again to address the changes.
Okay, then.
So if there's anybody in the audience that'd like to submit a public comment, please do it now. Also online as well. So go
Then
ahead.
I will hold my comments until after public comment.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, may we have the first public commenter, please?
Of course. Krista Pleiser?
Good afternoon, Chair Gutierrez, council members. Thank you for opening public comment again in order to comment on these new items that have come up in here. There's a lot here. As the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors and the Santa Barbara Rental Property Association commented on, we have several questions. One of them has to deal especially with the right to re-rent. In that standpoint, and within your ordinance itself, it says a qualified tenant subject to a no-fault cause termination of tenancy. You continually, throughout this ordinance, say termination of tenancy, but then it was also stated out that a no-fault just cause tenancy, termination of tenancy, shall be deemed for all purposes to be temporary interruption of the tenant's rights. However, if you are terminating your tenancy, you are terminating the lease. Therefore, you do not have that contractual obligation between the tenant and the landlord any longer. Therefore, if that is to be the case, then you can't have the best of both worlds. You can't have both of these. So you either need to have the termination of the tenancy, which includes all of the permits, all of the notifications, the proper time period, the relocation, or you don't. You cannot have it both ways. So that needs to be clarified. And there's also issues, as Councilmember Jordan stated out, with the contractor. I don't know if anyone has tried to do any type of remodeling, any type of contractor work recently. I'm going to say since COVID, there are no contractors. There are virtually no contractors in this area in order to do this, and now you're trying to get someone to come in with an opinion on if the person should be able to stay or not in the unit. With that, however, you are now having someone, yet again, give an opinion, not someone who's actually gone through, done the work, looked at the work, but you also are now asking them to have liability upon their license in order to be able to give this opinion. There's a lot of other issues with this, insofar as on page 19 under civil enforcement C, it says that the court can impose civil penalties up to $10,000 per violation. I believe that it's actually $2,000 per violation per state law, civil code. And I know other people will talk about the other issues here. So thank you for letting us comment and opening public comment back up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Stacy Kaplan.
Thank you, Chair and council members, for opening this back up for discussion, because there is a lot that's newer here. I just wanted to acknowledge that the majority of the egregious behavior that has been documented has been done by corporations and not our mom and pop owners. And Councilmember Jordan did mention, should there be differentiation between those owners of perhaps 10 units or more, just the number he threw out, and the mom and pops. And I really encourage you to explore that, really explore that in the future in your considerations, because we're talking about a big difference in the way business is done. Also, regarding the changes today on page 9, item B, that the notice of termination must be filed with the Community Development Department when it's given to the tenant. That's basically a rental registry, which we don't have. So please consider that carefully as well. That seems like an additional onus on the housing provider, which is not necessary. Page 14, Krista Pleiser spoke to this. You know, we're talking about Costa-Hawkins and the right to re-rent once contractual obligation has been fulfilled. With tenant relocation assistance, funds paid, and proper notification, that has been accomplished or would be accomplished. So to say that this is temporary and still getting all of those items checked off, I still do believe that's a violation of Costa-Hawkins. So please do look into that further. Item additional limitation on no fault just cause. This was not even discussed last week, so public comment needs to be heard more fully on this section. An owner who acquires the property having 5 or more units, not being able to remodel substantially within a period of a year. I mean, that's a new owner's right in procuring a property and looking at what it's going to cost to run that as a business, which this is. And then I'd just say lastly, it was already mentioned, but the civil penalties of up to $10,000 per violation, I believe those do stand at $2,000. So thank you again for your consideration.
There's a lot to discuss here, and to make sure that those who are providing the bulk of housing to our tenant population are not being penalized by the actions of a few. Thank you.
Next speaker is Stanley Zankoff.
Hello, Chair and members of the committee. I just wanted to really applaud the work of the staff and the attorney's office, city attorney's office. I know that these are truly some of the best practices from around the state. And again, this is just about closing loopholes in something that I think we all agree on, which is, you know, say what you do and do what you say as a landlord. And if you are, then there's nothing to worry about. And I also just want to emphasize the urgency. There's currently dozens and dozens of tenants right now that are actually currently under the threat of rent eviction. This isn't a hypothetical issue that we're just discussing here. There's people who are deciding whether or not to move out of the area and give up their livelihoods because they've gotten a notice, or stick around because they think that there's a fighting chance that these bad actors can actually be held to a standard that you know is worthy of our city to actually have these protections. So, saying that there's a lot in here is, to me, seems a little bit like a cop-out, right? This is just best practices and strengthening an ordinance that by giving it the best possible language to say what you do and do what you say. And this is going to affect not just the tenants in the city who are either currently under threat of rent eviction or might be or have that hanging over their heads, but it also is about the region's general housing affordability as a whole. Again, we're seeing rent evictions as probably the #1 reason why our housing rental market is going up right now, right? This is time is of the essence, and I just really want to emphasize that. Thanks.
Next speaker is Frank Rodriguez.
Chair Gutierrez and Ordinance Committee. Really appreciate all the eyes and the comprehensiveness of what's being added to these policies. I agree with what Stanley just said. I don't think it's something very new. I think it's just really getting into the details to make sure that the loopholes that we're closing are to create a better conversation and relationship between the landlords and tenants. At the end of the day, we want good faith. When decisions are being made of someone being evicted from a place they've been living at. And so I think one of the big things when we're talking about mom and pops and these corporations is these rent evictions has been affecting everybody. We want to make sure that when we put a policy in a code, it's as applicable to everyone, so there's no confusion with the community. And at the same time, when we're dealing with these issues of good faith and making sure we're talking about anti-harassment, about being able to have the right to return, we're talking about something that should be available for everybody. I think there's other more political issues where I think we do need to create a difference and can talk about having a difference between small mom and pops and corporations. But these laws, when we're talking about evictions, when we're talking about anti-harassment, when we're talking about the ability for someone to know they're not going to be evicted by somebody going around the law to get someone out, I think we need to make sure that it's clear for everybody so there's no confusion. And so I think the applicability should be for corporate landlords and with mom and pops. So I really appreciate y'all for taking this on and really listening to the legal experts who are seeing firsthand what's going on with tenants because we want to make sure we keep tenants here housed. Thanks, y'all.
Next speaker is Max Golding.
Everybody, I'll be brief because I know there's the 2 p.m. meeting. Please accept all the changes from legal aid. As Frank said, the eviction defense attorneys are seeing the nightmare, the economic terrorism that is done when rent evictions happen. Other kinds of try to flip the property evictions happen, and people end up they end up homeless, they end up just forced out, communities are disrupted, and everything they say about mom and pop landlords is it's a distraction. It's not a good argument. They just use it every time because, I don't know, it works, but don't let it work. Thanks.
Next speaker, Gabe Escobedo.
Good afternoon again. I'll be far briefer this time. Again, thank you to the city attorney's office for such diligent work. I think that each question that's been asked of the city attorney about these questions and the changes and the updates to the ordinance, they've all received reasonable answers. And I think for an area like ours where we are experiencing rent evictions happening all along the South Coast, this is a really urgent matter, and we need to make sure that these protections are in place throughout the process, no matter where a tenant is in the process. And I spoke earlier about how proud I am today to be at an ordinance committee meeting with these two items. And we spoke about generating new affordable units earlier. Well, the housing solution is more than just supply and demand. It's also about keeping people in their homes and making sure that people have a safe, healthy place to live in, and that's what this is about. And so once again, your leadership on ordinance committee is well appreciated, and for staff as well, for the time that you've taken to engage with legal experts in the community that are seeing this day in, day out. I just want to thank you all and encourage you to approve the changes proposed today. Thank you.
And our final speaker is Nick. I apologize, I can't read your last name, Nick. Gonzalez.
Nick Gonzalez, I'm a small housing operator, Chairman Gutierrez and the committee. I don't know how the tide sways so quickly from one direction to the next. 219, you were legally prosecuting landlords for failing to do improvements to property. Scared all the small mom and pops when you went after certain landlords for failure to keep up property. Today, we're on the opposite extreme. Now you're making it almost virtually impossible for many of the mom and pops to operate. I heard the prior speaker, it's not amused. A lot of people have put their entire life into their property. It might be 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 units, maybe it's 4 units, but that's their savings. That's their 401k. That's their pension. And you're causing gentrification of people as well because they have long-standing roots and things in these areas, and they're being pushed out. Many of the areas, the west side, the east side, long-standing generational families are having to face gentrification because they no longer can keep up with all the myriad of rules, regulations, and impositions like $10,000 fees. It's real. And again, you're using a broad brush. You keep hearing repeatedly over that there's many, 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 but we all really know that the mass majority were the mass evictions in Mr. Jordan's district, and in, I'm not certain who the other district was out of the area. It has an impact. It has a significant impact on these mom and small pop operators, and they are the majority of your housing providers. And you're failing. You're making mom and pop operators like villains. Your housing stock, ironically, you're gonna discuss your housing element. Your housing stock is old. You need renovations. You're putting in place rules that are going to cause blight throughout this community. People are either going to sell and get out, and the corporates are going to fill the vacuum, and the hedge funds, which get their money from your pensions, or you're going to create just blight because people are not going to be able to go through the myriad of regulations to get done what they need to get done. Carve out some exceptions. 15 units or less doesn't require professional management. To me, that might be a breaking point. With 15 or more units, you require to have professional management. It's a requirement. Find some line to look at and really try to differentiate between this overall broad statement of everybody and really just address the core issue. And you can address the core issue without having really significant financial impacts on a lot of your residents. And why does a tenant have any, there is this relationship, but everybody's important. We all work together. We need to work together more versus just pounding one side. Thank you.
Chair Gutierrez, no further speakers.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'd like to open it up again to my colleagues for discussion and, City Attorney.
Chair, before you enter into your deliberations, if I may make a few clarifications to some of the comments, because I want you to have a clear understanding of what the ordinance really does and says, because there are some misrepresentations. First of all, if that's okay, with regard to the issue of so-called Costa-Hawkins violation, termination of tenancy, I would like to point out that termination of tenancy is a defined term in this ordinance, and it's any recovery of possession. And so we could get into semantics as to what actually happens when you have a rent eviction and what the effect is. But the whole purpose of the right of first refusal is, and the rent control provisions that we have on it, is based upon the premise that if you're substantially remodeling and you have a right to come back in, with that, if you don't want to have the rent restriction, that's a policy choice for you, but it is in effect a continuation of the existing relationship, and you have the right to, I think, impose that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have put it in the ordinance. With regard to the $10,000 penalty, the representation is inaccurate. The $10,000 penalty is an additional civil penalty remedy that's in addition to other remedies. It's not automatic. It's only imposed by the court, and it only relates to harassment conduct. It has nothing to do with just cause eviction. And so we need to be very clear. That's why I mentioned that there were two different penalty sections in the ordinance. And so it's only if you engage in behavior that's willful, so it serves no lawful purpose, and injures a party by harassing them, that you might be subject to a civil penalty. So we just need to make that clear. And then with regard to the notice to the Community Development Director, that applies only in the context of a good faith just cause eviction for the purpose of taking the unit off the market. It's not a rental registry. There are other things that have to be filed with regard, for example, the building permits and whatever on a substantial remodel, but that's in no case are these a rental registry type activity. These are to give, they're really transparency provisions that let everybody know what the intention is and to support the notion that it was taken in good faith. And that concludes my response to those particular comments.
Thank you, Mr. Henschke. Okay, now I'd like to open it back up to my colleagues for deliberation, discussion, and potential motion. Councilmember Snedden.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. And just, wow, Mr. Henschke, I'm so happy you're here today and following through on this. And I have such confidence in your legal expertise and your responsiveness to what we're requested to be able to look at today and have before us. And it really is just a continuation of direction that we gave at the last meeting rather than curveball or anything new. I'm going to make a few comments, and again, having just recently reread that housing element later this afternoon, I'm just going to flash this picture. This is figure B27. This is the city. This is renters who are overpaying for housing at 30% or 50%. It is the entire city. And then I'm going to read just a couple of the statistics from the housing element, and that will back up the reasons for why I'm prepared to move this ordinance forward in its entirety, with also the recommendation to come back with changes as forward this to council with recommended changes as amended, and prepare changes to 26.40 to close the loopholes on reoffering of a lease. Just some statistics. The city median rent apartments, and this is in the housing element, table B4, 2 bedrooms, $3,750, 3 bedroom, $4,125, one bedroom, $2,598. This should be enough money to take care of renovations and health and safety updates and things that are needed. Also from the housing element on page 24, 50% of renter households are cost burdened, 26% are extremely cost burdened. For lower income renters, they're overpaying 77% of the households. And this one is significant to what we're looking at today. 70% of renters worry rent will go up to levels they can't afford, and 31% worry about landlord behavior, that rent will go up if they request repair or they will be evicted. And this is exactly what this ordinance is addressing. When we look at just quickly here, displacement risk, from 2015 to 2020, 1 in 4 survey respondents had to move from where they were renting when they did not want to. 1 in 3 Hispanic residents have been displaced over the last 5 years. I think the data is clear that these type of protections need to be in place. This does no way mean that every mom and pop property owner is harassing or overcharging or using rent evictions as an excuse, but there is a issue citywide that needs to be addressed. So with that, I will reiterate that I'll make the motion to forward the ordinance with the recommended changes as amended and prepare for council section 26.40 to close the loopholes on reoffering of the lease. And just as a further comment, I'll reiterate again for all of these reasons that we need these strong protections in addition to a rent cap.
Thank you, Councilmember Sneddon. Councilmember Jordan?
I'll second that, and I have a couple comments also then. I think I'm going to continue to do some research on that contractor thing. I can't imagine being a contractor and being in the secondary position and being asked to come sell an opinion that has all of the responsibility and none of the accountability that the first contractor has. It's just not sitting very well with me. So, we'll have a talk on that some more, I think. I'd just like to work on that some more with you. And then another item I'd like to discuss further with you too is the separation of entities. I know it's been mentioned in here before, but hasn't really been pushed. I'm not an attorney, but it just seems not very feasible that you can pick on an owner who's owned by one entity and not pick on an owner that's not owned by another entity when you're using that broad brush. Broad brushes get used all the time. I have to stop at the stop sign. I have to drive the speed limit. I have to stop at the signal. It's not because I'm not a good driver. It's because there's drivers out there who aren't a good driver. And so I don't have an answer for that. And then, Dan, I know we have data that's probably old, but it kind of paints a picture on this hierarchy of units in complexes, and I think we can answer the question, at least at one time, how many rental complexes out there were 4 units or less, how many were 5 or more, and how many were 15 or more. We did a study at one time back years ago, and I guess I'd like to hear some more information. It doesn't have to be a council, it can just be a conversation also on what that looks like out there in the field. And then, there's a real, it's like this is, even just saying a cooling off period of 5 units or more, I know there's a real, it affects real lives out there if you're just in 1 unit or 2 units. I get that. The obscenities I've seen are larger complexes. I get that too, but where's that line? And then to the gentleman in the back who said you're using a broad brush, we are using a broad brush. And I can tell you over the last year and a half or 2 years, it's a certainty that the state and regional and local actions have added to the rent increases. I mean, if you're a property owner and you're seeing relocation expenses put on, and you're seeing caps put on, and you're hearing talk about actual structured rent control, but you've been carrying people in your complex for 15 and 20 years at below market rates, you panic. I mean, you know, my poster child, Lower Bass Street, for knocking on 52 doors and having people break down crying in tears in front of me, all of those people had been there many, many, many years and were paying a reasonable rate for rent, and the property was sort of reasonably being kept up, but the trigger for the obscene event was the purchase of the building. So I frankly don't know how to stop what I see happening out there in the community without a broad brush being used. So I got lots of friends on the other side of the aisle who will work on me on what that could look like, and I'd encourage you to that. I'll say this publicly, what I've said privately, that the moms and pops and those that are in the middle between moms and pops and large organizations need to do a better job about constructively coming to the conversation in how to fix what the problem is that's happening, not just to protest against the restrictions being put on them. Until there's an avenue to make improvements on what's happening out there, it's just an argument over, I own property, you can't do that to me, versus the human tragedy that's taking place out there in the streets. And somewhere in there on people who have, I think, subject matter expertise in this area are some alternatives that can constructively be applied. And I say that with all sympathy, because I know some of you people have been at the table before on an effort with that, and there's some bad baggage there on how that worked out. But it can't just be a complaint about what's taking place. You also have to, I think, figure out a way to embrace what's taking place as a human tragedy, and how can you play a role constructively in remedying that while at the same time protecting your interests. So, so my comments, and you have my second.
Thank you. I will also support moving this forward to the full council and encourage everyone to keep the conversation going with your suggestions, and we'll see you all for the full council meeting on this issue and be able to hear all your suggestions and ideas to how to address this. And with that, I thank you, and we'll open it up for a vote.
So we have moved by Councilmember Snedden, seconded by Councilmember Jordan, to forward staff recommendations to City Council and direct City Attorney's Office to prepare and bring back an ordinance amending 26.40 to close any loopholes on offering a lease. Okay, we'll take a vote.
Okay, that passes unanimously.
Thank you.
you very much, everyone. We look forward to hearing all your ideas and perspectives. And with that, I adjourn this meeting.